Hello, my name is Daniel, and in this tutorial I will show you how we make the car control rig procedural so we can reuse it and apply our own car model to it, and everything adjusts automatically inside the control rig. So we don't have to manually place our controls again, everything adjusts automatically. So let's right click the car control rig here and duplicate it. And then I simply rename it to _procedural. Wonderful. And we save it, of course. And then double click it and open the blueprint. And as you can see here, we have the controls and we created them manually. So we choose the bone here, right click and then new control. And now we want to create the controls automatically. We want to spawn them inside the rig hierarchy here. And we can do that with the construction event. But first I want to disconnect the forward solves execution via here. So with command and click, I simply disconnect it. So nothing can happen to the rig anymore during the control creation. So let's search for the construction event, and with the construction event we are able to spawn controls and null objects and other things. And in this case I want to spawn my first control, which is the back control. So we simply search for a spawn control node, and inside the spawn control node we have to tell this node which template should this node use. So we right click at the settings here, and then we choose the wildcard template. And here we have different templates for the controls. So we have to think about the control's behavior, and here we have the back control, and it's only possible to move the back control. So the y-axis, x-axis and z-axis. So this one needs to be a transform control. So we search for the wildcard settings, transform settings, and now we don't have any error here and we are good to go. So first of all, we need to make sure the control has the correct naming. So this one is called back control, and we rename it to back _ control. And as you can see now we have this back control here, back control _2, and that's because we have already a control which is named back control, so it assigns _2 to it. And we need to make sure we have the correct naming, because the name is referenced here in the forward solves graph. So we need this correct name so everything works correctly in the forward solves graph. So then we have to tell this node, okay, which is your parent. And as you can see here in the rigs hierarchy, the back control doesn't have any parent, so we choose as parent type none, and we don't have to apply a name here. Then the back control's position is here at the back joint. So I want to apply the offset transform position of this control to the back joint, and we can do that by simply getting this back bone here in and connect the transform with the offset transform. And now if I select my back control, you'll see it sits directly at the position of the back bone here, which is very nice. Then we can apply the shape settings to it, so we make sure it is visible. Let's move the nodes a little bit up, something like that. Then we can apply a color. So this one needs a blue color. then also the scale here I try 10x, 30y and 10c. And I search for the correct shape, which is in this case a circle sig. Okay, let's compile it and take a look here. As you can see now we have the same control here, so I am able to delete my old manually created control. So that's the control here. Let's recompile it. And sometimes the color settings are a little bit buggy, so you have to put in something else to the other values here. Recompile it, save, and then put 0 into red channel, 0 into green channel, and 1 into blue channel. And now we have the correct color here. So sometimes the color settings are a little bit buggy. Okay, and I think that's it for the back control. Here, let's create the null object. So simply search for a spawn, a null node here, and the null object here doesn't have any parent, so we simply choose none for parent type. And we rename this null object to orient chassis. So simply put in orient underscore chassis. Wonderful. And this null object needs to sit directly on the position of the chassis bone. So I simply drag and drop my chassis bone in and simply connect the transform with the transform. Wonderful. And I think that's it for the null object. Let's take a look at the position, and we can simply switch to the construction event here, and now we have the pivot point for the null object here, so we can make sure it sits on the correct position, which is in this case absolutely correct. Wonderful. Good. Let's create the first control or the second control, which is the tire rotation. So we need an float template for this one here. So if I select a control, as you can see, we change the value type to float. So let's search for this spawn control node again, and we choose as template here float settings. Wonderful. Let's rename this to tire underscore rotation. Nice. And the parent is our orient chassis null object. So we search for type null, and now we have this item output ports here for our null object, and we can simply connect the name output with the name input of the parent here. Wonderful. And as you can see now, the tire rotation sits directly underneath our orient null object, which is very nice in this case. So now we need an offset transform for this one here, and let's put in our chassis bone again, get the bone, and simply connect the rotation here with the rotation and the scale with the scale, then the translation X and Y, and I want to override the C translation because I need an offset from the chassis bone, so the controller sits on top of our car. So I can simply apply this with some math add node. So I simply put in the C value here into the B port, and then the result to the C port, and here with the A port I can simply create an C offset. So maybe in this case we try 150. And as you can see now we have this control here. Let's change the shape settings a little bit, or first the control settings. So our primary axis is X, which is in this case correct. Then we have to enable the minimum and maximum limit. Let's apply the minimum limit of 100 and the maximum value of 100. Then we want to draw the limits. Shape is visible and we want an arrow to thick. Let's recompile it. Wonderful. And of course we have to rescale this a little bit. So let's change the scale transform, maybe 5 by 5 by 5. Recompile it. Okay, that's nice. And then we have to change the rotation, but first we want to move the nodes a little bit up. And for the rotation, we simply use an Euler from Euler node here. And let's change the x-axis to 90 degrees and the z-axis also to 90 degrees. Nice. Now we have the controller here with the correct shape and the correct settings. Let's change the color a little bit, so maybe 0.5 red and 0.5 blue and 0 green. Wonderful. It's nice. Okay, I think that's our tire rotation control. So we can simply collapse the settings again. Okay, let's move the things a little bit so it's nice and clean. Wonderful. Okay, now we have the tire rotation control. Let's create a chassis control here. So I simply search for a spawn control again. And we need to choose the template here. And as you can see, we only move the chassis control Y, X, and Z. So we search for a transform template, transform settings, wonderful. And we rename this control to chassis, of course. And the parent is also our null object because the control sits underneath the null object. So let's search for null and simply connect the name of the spawn null with the parent of the control here. Nice. Oops, that's the wrong port. We need to make sure we get the parent name port here. So let's connect it. Wonderful, nice. And let's change the settings a little bit. So first of all, we need the offset transform from our chassis bone here. So we have the correct position. So let's drag and drop in the chassis bone, get the bone, and simply connect the transform with the offset transform. So let's select the chassis control, and as you can see, it sits directly at the position of the chassis bone. But we also need to move it up. And this time we don't do it with the offset transform, we do it with the transform of the shape settings. And for the transform controls, this is possible, but for a float control, this is not possible. I don't know why. You could also expand this, and then you have the translation for the shape settings, but this doesn't work. So I did it with the offset transform. But in this case, we can use the shape transform settings here. So let's make the shape visible, and we search for an arrow for thick. As color, we need 1 for red and 1 for green. I think let's recompile it and then scale 10 by 10 by 10. Nice, recompile it. And then we need to create the offset for the shape. So let's try 130 in this case, compile it, and as you can see, now we have the chassis control, which is very nice. Okay, that's our chassis control. Let's collapse the shape settings, move this a little bit around. Okay, wonderful. Let's create the steering control. So we simply search for another spawn control node, and the steering control is an rotator. So we simply search for the rotator settings here as template. We simply rename it to steering. Wonderful. And it also needs to sit underneath our null object. So we search for type null, and we simply connect the name with the null spawn node here. Wonderful. And the control's position, the controller position is the front bone position. So let's simply get the front bone here, connect the transform with the offset transform, and then we have to apply the shape settings here. So we simply make sure it is visible. Then we search for a sphere thick, transform scale maybe 3 by 3 by 3, and translation C maybe 80. Okay, let's compile it. Here's our control. Color red 1. Nice. Okay. And now we have the steering control. Let's create the move tire controls. So simply drag and drop the pin out and search for spawn control again. And as you can see, the tire controls are also a transform control. We only move it here on the C axis. So let's search for template transform. Wonderful. And the first one is move tire underscore back left. So let's rename it to move underscore tire underscore BL for back left. And the parent is also the null object here. Let's connect the name with the spawn null object here. Wonderful. And the offset transform for this one is our tire bone, tire back left bone in this case. So let's get the bone here in. And in this case, we need a local space. So let's connect the transform with the offset transform. And as you can see, here is our move tire control, which is very nice. Let's change the settings a little bit. So we need as shape an arrow 2 thick, then color 1 red, 1 green, and transform settings, the scale maybe 5 by 5 by 5. Let's recompile it. Okay, it's nice. Now we need to apply the translation Y, which is in this case -30. Let's recompile it. Wonderful. And then we need to apply the correct rotation for the shape. And we simply search for an Euler from Euler. And then we change the X axis to 90 degrees. Wonderful. And now we have the move tire control, and let's simply duplicate them. And then I will be back and we take a look at our forward solves graph, so everything gets executed correctly. now we have all the controls here. So they are all procedurally created. So if you select a control, you will see this item has been created procedurally. So it's an indicator for you that this item is not manually changeable. Here inside the settings, you need to find the correct control node for it to change the settings. Wonderful. And now we can delete the null object here and all the other controls. So let's simply remove them, recompile everything, and then we can save it. And now we have all the controls, and now we have to make sure our forward solves graph executes everything correctly. So simply disconnect all the pin outputs here from the sequencer node. And simply execute the forward solves with the sequencer node. And then first we want to check the basic IK here. So simply connect the basic IK with the A output port. And in this case, if I move my back control around, everything should work correctly. Wonderful. That's the correct behavior for the IK. Let's recompile it to reset everything back. And let's take a look at the parent constraint here for the orient chassis null object. So we simply connect the reroute node here with the B output port. Let's recompile it. And if I move my back control around, the other controls follow, which is absolutely correct. Very nice. Let's recompile it. And then we connect the C output with the reroute node here. And that's for our chassis. So we make sure it gets the correct control. And in this case, we need the chassis control here. So let's put this in. And as you can see, it's not the correct position for our chassis, and that's because we applied or we copied the translation settings from the bone here, and now we have to make sure this works always. So I simply put in my chassis bone here. So I get my bone and simply connect the translation here, the X and Y. And then I have to apply the C translation. I also make sure I choose the local space in this case, so we have the correct position. And now if I move my chassis bone, my chassis control up C direction, it works very nice because this one is added, but I want to add the C translation of the control to the C translation of the transform bone, and we simply do that with the node here. So we have the C translation of the control, and now we simply put in the C translation from the bone into the B port. Very nice. And now I think that's it. So let's move this a little bit around, and maybe we need a reroute node here. Move this a little bit around. Wonderful. Let's take a look at the control here. We move it up, nice. We rotate it also very nice. Let's recompile everything to reset everything back, and let's connect the reroute node here with the sequencer, the output port. Let's recompile everything, and I think that's our wheel rotation and steering. So let's take a look at the steering control. Okay, it's nice, it's the correct behavior. Take a closer look to our brakes here. Okay, they don't rotate because we have to execute the parent constraints here, so we can check this later. But first of all, the control has the correct behavior here, which is very nice. And then we have to try out this rotate control. Wonderful. Also the correct behavior, which is also very nice. Let's connect the last output with the reroute node. Nice. And let's try out the steering control and take a look at the brake here. Now the brake follows the tire rotation, which is also very nice. So correct behavior. And then we have a little bug in this rig. So if I move my chassis control up, in this case, and then move some tire up a little bit, and simply move the chassis control something like that, or something like that, you will see the tire slides around a little bit. So you have this sliding or wobbling inside the tire, and that's because we have to fix something in the parent constraints here for the bones, the tire bones. And here we have the translation filter, and we need to enable X and Y for them. So for every tire bone, we need to enable translation filter X and Y. So now if I move my control around, you will see the tire doesn't slide, which is nice. Wonderful. Okay, I think we need some cleanup a little bit here, but now we have a procedural car rig, and we can simply apply any kind of car model to it. But we have to make sure we use the correct bones hierarchy here. And I will show you that now. But first I want to show you something about the filtered channels here. So let's take a look at our control rig here, our procedural control rig. We simply drag and drop it into our scene, and now we have a new sequencer, a new take here. And if we take a closer look to the controls here, we have all the tracks for the different transform settings, but we don't need any track. So for the back control, we only need the location X, Y, and Z. So we can apply this inside the filtered channel settings. So here we have the back control. Simply apply translation X, translation Y, and translation C. Let's recompile it, save it. And as you can see now, if I open up the back control, I only have the location X, Y, and C tracks, which is very nice. Then we have the tire rotation here. It doesn't have any filtered channels because it's a float slider. Then we have the chassis. We only need X, Y, and Z. So let's apply the filtered channels to it. Here we have the tire rotation. Then we have the chassis. So we only need translation X, translation Y, and translation C. Then we have this steering control here, and we only need the rotation C. So let's apply the filtered channel roll to it, compile it, take a look. So here we have the chassis, which is nice. Then we have the steering control, also very nice. Let's take a look. Wonderful. That's the correct behavior for it. Now we have the move tire controls, and here we only need the translation C axis. Move tire back left, move tire back right, translation C, translation C, and translation C. Very nice. Let's recompile everything, save everything, take a look to the controls. Wonderful. Let's move this tire up here and let's switch to unlit mode. Move the chassis around. Wonderful. Correct behavior, which is very nice. Okay, and now I want to show you how we apply another car model to the rig. So here we are back again in Cinema 4D, and as you can see, here I have my Lamborghini car model and I want to apply the procedural rig to it. So we have to make sure we use the correct bone structure, bones hierarchy here, and the correct naming for the bones, which is very important. And we need to make sure everything has the correct binding to its correct bone. So all the chassis parts to the chassis bone. And then for the tire is something special. We have the tire here and it needs to get binded to the rim bone, not to the tire bone, the rim bone. And then the brake, of course, to the brake bone. And that's it. Of course, you have to make sure all your materials and UV settings and selection settings are correct. And then you can export this out as FBX and re-import it into Unreal Engine. So here we are back again inside Unreal Engine. And as you can see now, I have imported my Lamborghini car model and I simply created a control rig, an empty control rig here. So nothing is inside the graph here. We only have the bones. And now I open up my procedural control rig, simply select all controls and copy them to the empty control rig here. So let's paste them in. Wonderful. Let's recompile everything and we are done. So we have the procedural car rig applied to the Lamborghini car model. You can adjust the top controls here, the steering control, chassis control and tire rotation controls, offset, transform by simply searching for the control here and simply jump into the shape settings, and here you have the translation C for it. And now we can put in 120, recompile everything, and so we can adjust the translation offset settings for the shape. And of course, the tire rotation is offset is applied here in the add node. Very nice. Let's take a look to the rig here. If I move my control around, everything behaves exactly as expected. So you can simply apply your own car model to the procedural rig here if you use the correct bone structure and the correct naming. So I hope that's very useful for you, and you can buy this procedural rig now on CG Trader. So the car rig gets an update, and from now on you will find also the procedural rig inside the car rig project. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks for watching this tutorial. See you soon and goodbye.